Welcome to Witnessing Christ. Witnessing Christ is a truth and love ministry podcast designed to help biblical Christians witness to their Mormon friends, family, and missionaries. For more Bible-based resources, check out tilm.org. We have all kinds of resources to support you, including classes, witnessing scenarios, books, and so much more. Visit tilm.org today.
I decided just to take some time with God, and I went outside on the porch. I opened up the Bible and I started reading in the words of the Bible about the manna from heaven. My name is Christin, and I was a Mormon raised in Utah. Now I live in Texas, and I'm a born-again Protestant Christian.
Welcome to Jesus is Enough, a series where we dive deep into the transformational faith stories of ex-Mormon Christians. These are true stories of real souls, whom God has rescued out of the darkness by revealing to them the biblical gospel message through His Word, the message that Jesus is enough. This week on the show, we have part 3 of Christin's story. As Christin moves forward with her life and starts anew after her messy, failed marriage, she realizes that God has been leading her to Him the entire time. She looks back on her life and considers that God has been giving her manna, bread from heaven, changing her life and writing her story one day and one piece at a time.
Paid in full, all sufficient, there and now my
Now here's part 3 of Christin's story of discovering that Jesus is enough. Thanks for listening.
Now that Brad was out of the house and his sin widely known, Christin didn't feel as alone. She sought out support, and God provided it for her in some of the most unexpected ways. Day by day, little by little, manna, bread from heaven.
And so I went to a little organization where people recovering from addiction, spouses of those, and one of the ladies in there, she'd recognized me from a time before. And she's like, hey, let's go for a walk. So we went for a little walk, and I was able to share a little bit about, marriage is a little complicated right now, but the bakery is doing really well. A few days later, I got this random text from her, and she said, hey, Christin, I don't know how you feel about this, but my husband and I have $90,000. We've been trying to invest for a period of time, and all the doors have been closing. I made a phone call, and the funds are freed up. We feel like this is meant for you in a bakery, if that's something that you're thinking about. So to get that kind of a text, I thought, all right, God, you're making a way for this. $90,000 is a good start. I started looking for locations.
Christin found a location and got to work getting things into order to get a lease at the bank.
They brought me into a meeting where I had to kind of show my numbers and everything. My guarantor backed out last minute. So I had no financial backing, but I did have some hot bread that I put on the table and I served out to them. For whatever reason, they just said, this is the kind of thing, it's really different, it's what we're looking for. And they went ahead and signed papers that I could start a lease with them. It didn't make financial sense, but it was a blessing that I was able to get in there and get a start. I had no capital. I had just enough to build in there and get the ovens in it, but I had no business knowledge. I needed employees now, and I didn't know where to get them. All of a sudden, the phone started ringing from friends. Hey, Christin, I haven't worked anywhere for 20 years, but I feel like right now this summer's meant to be to help you at your bakery. Is that something that you want? And my daughter, too, by the way. People came to me. I didn't even have to put it in the paper or anything for employees. I named my business Manna, Bread from Heaven based on that moment when I was reading the scriptures and Jesus showed me, I am the bread, I am the life, and you can eat bread and satisfy your stomach for a little while, but I will satisfy you long term. For the very little bit of time and money that I had, it was incredible how manna was able to come together like bread from heaven, just one day at a time. You need this, here it is. If you need this, here it is.
Christin would soon need God and His strength and sustenance more than ever. While all this was taking place, the police finally came for Brad. He was arrested, tried, convicted, and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Soon after, Christin and Brad divorced, and she was granted full custody.
My kids have visited him a couple times just because it's like, hey, he's my dad. But now they don't. Now they've kind of like seen it for what it is, and they're able to move on.
After Christin got the business up and running and made sure the kids were in a good place, eventually she too was ready to move on.
I decided it was time to start dating and find a man that would be a good example for my kids and that could be someone that could help me, and we could do this together. So I looked online for a Mormon single guy that was ready to date, and I found this guy that didn't drink, didn't smoke, no coffee, but he ended up being an evangelical Christian on the East Coast. But I thought, we'll just chat. I shared with him my story, and in the middle he stopped me and said, "Bishop, what church are you in?" And I said, "I'm a Mormon." He's like, we're not a fit. So I thought, okay, I'll tell him the whole story. It's probably the last time we're going to talk. And by the end, he said, "Okay, I've heard your story. You think you're a Mormon, but you're not. You're a born-again Christian, and you're in a cult. And I want to help you get out of that if I can." And it was interesting because I wasn't offended by him calling me a cult member. I thought it was actually one of the best and strongest forms of true caring, because he cared for my soul instead of just wanting us to get along. And I thought, that's really brave and bold. So I wanted to keep talking to him. And I said, just come over here. I'll find a place in the ward that you could stay. Maybe you could help me at the bakery and we can talk about all this stuff in person. And he's like, all right. So he packed up all his stuff in his car and he drove over here to Texas. And he just helped me a ton in the bakery during the day. And then every night he started asking questions. What about garments? What about polygamy? And at first they were easy to answer, like, that doesn't matter, this doesn't matter. And I said, the right questions for you to ask would be based on Jesus himself and on salvation. Like, ask those questions, because those are the deal breakers. Don't ask about polygamy and all these garments and things. And so he's like, okay, then did Jesus wear garments? And then that hit me. Garments represent so much, because garments are about temples, and temples are the way to heaven. And Jesus is in heaven, right? So did Jesus wear garments was a really tricky question, because I kind of knew he didn't wear garments, and neither did the 12 apostles. And then it dawned on me, and they didn't really have temples. I kind of knew that somewhere. And so everything kind of came full circle just based on that one question. And so I had no answer for him, and I went home just kind of shocked, because Jesus is supposedly the pinnacle of the gospel and the church. If he didn't wear garments, we're in trouble.
Christin's East Coast friend convinced her to read and study the Bible with him more closely.
At one point, he asked me, if God is something different than what you think he is now, would you want to know? And that's a really serious, sober question. It's not just how much you would give up, you'd have to walk away from church and family and everything you know, but it's also giving up that understanding of him. So we opened up Isaiah, where it says, I am the Lord, there is none else, there is no God beside me. So that would imply there aren't other gods and goddesses out there, out in the universe. But if God said there is no other God beside me, that said a lot. That was all-encompassing. And so that really changed my whole faith view. And just one thing at a time started changing everything. So we open up Hebrews, and it starts right out saying God spoke through prophets in the past, but now he speaks through his son. So it's very clear that that was then and this is now. So the fact that we're still relying on living prophets to get words from God and messages from God, it was not biblical. And one thing after another, I started realizing not only does Mormonism have some problems, but it literally doesn't align with the Bible. So he added to those things with all of these other understandings of where the holes are in Mormonism. But each time he shared that, he also shared with me the message of grace, which took a lot of time for me to really get. He's like, it's not about what you do.
Although God had been teaching her to trust in him and his perfect work alone, Christin was still clinging partially to her own efforts.
But we have to keep the commandments, right? Don't we? Aren't we responsible for our choices? And he said, no, Christin, it's Jesus. He's done all of it. It's not up to you. And the commandments are not a requirement of salvation. They're a result of a salvation that he's done already in your heart, changing what you want. And those things turn into the keeping the commandments, the fruits.
This new understanding of the commandments and fruits of faith stuck with Christin. It contradicted the messages she was hearing as a still active member of the Mormon Church.
There was a state conference where an area general authority said, all the children stand up on your chairs. We're going to sing I'm a Child of God together. My son Shaden gets up on a chair and he starts singing, I'm a child of God and he has sent me here, has given me an earthly home with parents kind and dear. Lead me, guide me, walk beside me, help me find the way. Teach me all that I must do to live with him someday. And at that moment, it just struck me, and I literally got up and walked out of state conference. And even my family, they knew I was working on, considering something. They're like, Mom, just leave state conference. And I did. I was so mad. That was basically the last, the rug that was pulled out from under me. Like, this is not what I thought it was. And that's when the light went on, and I remembered canning peaches and listening to Narnia. And I saw everything that had led forward in my life out of that changed heart that happened that day, and how my desires had changed and all the things that God had been doing. And I knew that that was the correct pattern. And then when I compared that to Mormonism, their salvation was not the salvation that Jesus taught about in the scriptures.
Throughout her life, Christin yearned to earn God's pride, tirelessly seeking the elusive extra credit to garner his special favor. But God taught her that her worth was not defined by her deeds, but the boundless gifts God has already bestowed upon her, freely and unconditionally.
So that was the deal breaker. It was time to start checking out another church.
So Christin's East Coast friend helped her find a new Christian church home.
So he showed me a church. He said, this place, it looks a little like your bakery. It's got this little shop on the side. It's got a lot of Africa, a lot of wood. You might like it here. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to go to church for the first time. I've never been to another church. As I walked in the doors, I saw these scriptural biblical words up on the wall to the song that they were singing, which is So Will I.
God of creation.
So this song, So Will I, it starts out by talking about the creation, that God created all the creatures. But if the creatures obey your word and follow you, then so will I.
You spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of life.
And that became a resolute part in my heart where I felt like, you know what? If you're about this, God, if this is your salvation and this is your Jesus, and you created me to worship you, then I will. If all of creation praises your name, then so will I, no matter what I'm giving up.
Christin knew there was a lot to give up, but based on something she had recently read in the Gospel of Mark, she was confident it would be worth it. Jesus and the gospel were worth it.
Mark chapter 10 talks about if you give up households and home, family, lands, all for my sake, then all those things will be returned to you with some persecutions, but then eternal life. And that gave me the courage to just step out and step into that church. There's another surrendering. And so I worshiped for the first time with them, just tears running down my face.
I can see your heart and everything you've made. Every burning star is signify of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I.
Freed from feeling the insatiable need to do things to earn God's approval and attention, Christin marvels at the beauty of his grace.
It's been really humbling as I realize how much he's gone out of his way for me, just for me to know him and to know his love and to know that it's not like through the steps and the ordinances and the attendance rolls and the visiting teaching. all of that stuff was for naught. That's not what the whole point is. The whole point is just Jesus. And that him reaching me rather than me having to strive for him was what the gospel is all about. So simple.
Christin has learned that because of his grace, God truly and deeply loves the whole world, but he also loves her individually, personally, and passionately. Grace is so simple indeed, yet so surprising, so significant, so sustaining. It's just like that manna, daily bread from the very heart of heaven.
The Israelites, they didn't do anything or earn their manna. He didn't say, I'm going to send manna if you're keeping the commandments. If you don't keep the commandments, you're going to go without. He sent it every day, no matter what they did. It was a tangible witness to his love for them. I'm here every day. I'm going to provide. I'll be here. Just accept it and receive it. Enjoy it. When I look back, I see a pattern of manna in my life from the beginning. God just opening my eyes a little at a time so that those scales could fall off over time. The manna from heaven, just one day at a time, one piece of bread at a time.
He chased down my heart through all of my failure and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die.
God provided the right people, bringing someone into my life that would just start wrecking, all my thoughts on Mormonism, seeing the people in Kenya and the way they were living for God, just everything at the right time.
As you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I.
God was just working this story in my heart, just one day at a time, one piece of bread at a time, so that when it was ready and my eyes were open and was ready to receive it, I was able to receive the full gospel and understand it. And I knew that this was the God that had taken me to Africa, the God that spoke to me through Narnia. This was the same God that saved my children from the pain that the news brought to them. The same God that led me to the terms of having to divorce. And it was the same God that led me into this church so that I could worship and be a part of his church. He's still providing daily for me, for my family, and for the people here.
I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed and work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I.
I was super grateful that there was a church that God led me straight into, because coming out of Mormonism is like falling off a cliff, and you're just like, please show me something, because my foundation was built on something else. My theology, my whole worldview was completely different before, and there were these pastors around me that were able to just love me and show me all these things and the new way to look at things. When I was baptized, I stepped up to the water and I looked out to my new family, and I realized that I had a new home. Like Mongangi said, family, yes, I hope they're there, but really it's God, and it's the family of Christ and the believers.
Out of thanks for how God has provided for her, Christin now uses her God-given baking skills to provide her church family with fresh baked bread for the sacrament of the Lord's Supper.
I come early, I like to slice it and cube it, and then I'll slowly walk around to all the stations, and I get to enjoy that worship almost like an early private, moment just with me and them, and I'm able to worship God while I'm walking around and putting all the bread in the bowls. It's really special. I love how people pause when they're eating bread. It's a time where they just rest, and that's what I see when people are going and taking his body and his blood that he shed for us.
As you speak, 100 billion failures disappear.
Just as Christin had surrendered her heart, her soul, her works to God, she also found peace and surrendering control and trust when it comes to her children.
My children, one at a time, different stories have come from that. My daughter, she continues to go to the Mormon church. She's married and they have a little girl and another one on the way. Joseph was just so disenchanted by Mormonism that he didn't want to get lied to again, and so he's pretty much written off all faiths altogether. He thinks there may be a God, but he's still trying to figure that out. Dallin was on his mission, and then right towards the end of his mission, trying to bring people to Mormonism, he hears my mom is not a Mormon anymore. He was really upset and hurt by that. There was a lot of friction, and I just prayed for his heart. So I said, I would like to show you some scriptures. I want to show you Hebrews and Galatians and Romans. Can we just sit and talk about this? I was like, this is a different gospel than the one that Jesus taught. Jesus didn't wear garments. He didn't teach about temples or forever families or anything that's unique to Mormonism. And Dallin was just fascinated and he just clung to every word. So 3 days later, he was out of the Mormon church. A while later, Jeffrey filed his mission papers. He got called to New Mexico. So I got a phone call and he said, Mom, come and get me. This is a man-made gospel and I can't preach it one more minute. And he's just been geeking out for Jesus ever since he got home. Benjamin, he was about 12 at that time. So since then, he's just been quietly processing things. And now he's just like, I know it's not Mormonism and I love being a Christian. Little Shaden, he was so young. He's more like a born into Christianity kid. Dallin asked me, Mom, if I leave the Mormon faith and I become a Protestant Christian like you're doing, I'd be giving up a lot. And it would be walking away from a lot of my friends and family, and it'd be hurting a lot of people, and I'd lose a lot of opportunities. Like, there's a whole lot that you gave up and that I'd be giving up. So what makes it worth all this change? And I said, Dallin, it's simply this. It's just Jesus. And I know that sounds simple right now, but when you get here, like when you make that switch and you start swimming in all of his love and his abundance and his grace, you'll get it. You'll know what I'm saying. It's just Jesus.
Like the shepherd who left the 99 to rescue one sheep, God miraculously sought out Christin, his one beloved little lamb. He did everything in his power to bring her into the fold of his love and care.
Like you would again. 100 billion times.
We don't need to add Jesus. He's plenty. He's enough.
What measure could amount to your desire?
He's not only enough, he's everything.
You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
Jesus is everything.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Jesus is Enough. To watch the video version of this episode or to support this project, please visit tilm.org/radio. Next time on Jesus is Enough, we will meet Carrie, a Mormon with a marriage founded on Mormonism and its teachings. As Carrie begins her life as a Mormon wife and mother, she feels suffocated by the pressure to perform. Unable to achieve perfection and seeking solace, Carrie finds respite in an unlikely place, an apostate church on the other side of the world. That's next time on Jesus is Enough. Jesus is Enough is presented by Truth in Love Ministry and is a production of Goldwing Productions. Truth in Love Ministry, based in Nampa, Idaho, is a Christian ministry devoted to proclaiming Christ to Mormons and empowering Christians to witness. In addition to offering time-tested training, it provides ongoing support. This includes person-to-person mentoring as well as websites with pages of practical tips, strategies, and witness stories. In addition to Jesus is Enough, it also produces the Witnessing Christ podcast. To learn more and lend your support, please visit tilm.org. Jesus is Enough is produced and written by Mark Parsons, with writing assistance from Molly Parsons.
It is done. It is finished. No more debt I owe. Paid in full. All sufficient.
out Jesus is Enough at jesusisenough.org. Until next week, remember, keep planting those gospel seeds, trusting in the power of God's word.
Hi friends, this is Molly from the Jesus is Enough ministry team. God pursued Christin throughout her whole life through his word and through many different people. And I'm struck by what Christin said about her East Coast friend. He cared for my soul instead of just wanting us to get along. This friend knew that he could lose the friendship, but he proclaimed the truth anyway. He valued her eternal life more than their earthly friendship. May all of us have the same kind of brave love for the lost. Jesus, give us courage and wisdom to lovingly proclaim the truth.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Witnessing Christ. Witnessing Christ is a truth in love ministry podcast. For more resources, visit tilm.org. If this podcast and other Truth in Love ministry resources have been a blessing to you, consider supporting the mission to proclaim Christ to Mormons and empower Christians to witness by visiting tilm.org/